You're listening to The Conversation Weekly from The Conversation. In case you missed it, Liverpool Football Club just won the English Premier League.
Liverpool are the champions of the Premier League. Liverpool are back on their perch. Liverpool, the Premier League champions.
Helping Liverpool on their way to victory was Mohamed Salah. The Egyptian football superstar scored as the club beat Tottenham 5-1 to seal the title in front of their home crowd at Anfield. The victory came just after Salah had signed a 2-year extension to his contract at Liverpool.
Mo, what drives you? Is it legacy that you're going to leave at Liverpool Football Club?
Absolutely. I just want to be able that. If I leave the football in any time, I just want to say I give it all. I didn't hold here or there. I give it all. I'm happy about my career. I just go.
We thought this would be a good moment to revisit an episode we first aired back in December 2022 about Mohamed Salah and about what role footballers can actually play in reducing prejudice and intolerance. That's a question that Salma Musa has been trying to answer. I came across Salma's work while doing some research for an episode we ran about depolarization. Back then, she was a professor of political science at Yale University in the US. She's actually since moved to California to become an assistant professor at UCLA. Salma thinks a lot about what actually works to reduce tensions between different groups of people and how to foster social cohesion. At the same time, she's Egyptian and she's a really big fan of Mohamed Salah.
Well, now you're going to make me seem not credible with my research, but yes, I am a fan of his. As an Egyptian, I mean, you love to see Egyptians make it in the big leagues in Europe. There's been a few before him, but really nothing and no one on the scale of Mo Salah. So, I mean, I love him on the field, of course. I mean, it's just magic. When he's at his best, when he's in form, there's nothing like it.
And were you a fan of Liverpool before he joined it in 2017?
I wasn't. I never really committed to any Premier League club. I follow a club in Egypt. That's kind of my home club, Zamalek. But now I'm committed. And so everyone asks me when he leaves, or he retires or whatever, are you still going to be a Liverpool fan?
There's something else about Mo Salah that actually makes him a very interesting subject for Salma's own research. He's a Muslim.
So it's not just that he's Muslim and it's something he keeps behind closed doors. He's prostrating in prayer after he scores a goal. His wife wears a headscarf and you see her on the sidelines. His daughter's name is Mecca, which is Islam's holiest site. More superficially, his name is Muhammad. He has a beard. He's Arab, all these things that people associate with Islam. So there's really no getting around the fact that this guy is a practicing Muslim. He is a typical Muslim. And so that was really the first time we had seen an athlete or a footballer at that level be so visible about their religiosity.
Salah joined Liverpool in 2017 and quickly became their star player. The next season, Liverpool won the European Champions League, followed the year after by the Premier League title in England. Salah was instrumental in their success and Liverpool fans embraced him.
For me and my co-authors, when we first saw the videos of Liverpool fans chanting, if he scores another few, then I'll be Muslim too. I mean, that really just cemented it for us. Like, this guy is special to be making people talk about Muslims this way.
UK public opinion surveys at the time showed that more than half of people agreed with the sentiment that there was a fundamental clash between Islam and the values of British society. So Salma was interested in what effect Salah might be having on Islamophobia in the UK.
There's been this classic social psychology theory since the 50s called the contact theory. And the idea is pretty simple, that when two people meet each other from different social backgrounds, if that contact involves them cooperating toward a common goal and they're sharing an equal power status within that meeting, even though in society they may be unequal, that kind of egalitarian cooperative contact is something that's going to reduce prejudice, it's going to build friendships, and on the whole, this is good for intergroup relations. That's all well and good, but it's not very scalable, right? It's hard to get people from different groups face to face and have them meet under these conditions, which are, pretty hard to fulfill in a natural way. So when you start asking yourself, well, what is the kind of contact that the average person has with members of minority groups? So Muslims in the UK, for example, like not everyone has a Muslim friend or coworker or someone on their block who they can have this kind of interaction with. But millions of people are watching Mo Salah, right? And so this is like a really neat, scalable way to look at the contact theory, a particular strand of it called parasocial contact. So the kind of exposure you have to celebrities, fictional characters, and for most people, that is their main way of learning about people from minority groups. And so it's really worth studying.
Salma and some of her colleagues decided to use Mo Salah as a way to test out this theory. They wanted to know whether exposure to Mo Salah reduced prejudice among Liverpool fans towards Muslims in the UK. The study they ended up designing was in 3 parts. The first focused on hate crimes. They decided to compare the number of hate crimes that happened in Merseyside, that's the area around Liverpool, and other counties in the UK. In 2018, they sent out Freedom of Information requests to every police force in the country. Their goal was to compare hate crime data for a couple of years before Salah joined Liverpool to what happened afterwards.
So we needed to come up with a prediction, like what is our best guess of what would have happened in Merseyside had Salah not joined? So to do that, to fill that in, we need to look at counties that had very similar hate crime trends before he joined and then follow what happened to them after he joined. And so that's what we did. And we just project that into the future. And that's our best guess of what should have happened in Merseyside.
And were these hate crimes specifically targeting Muslims or general hate crimes?
These were all religious and racial hate crimes, but not specifically toward Muslims. So we didn't know the identity of the victim, but we know that they're religious or racial hate crimes.
But you could assume that a high proportion of them would have been Islamophobic hate crimes.
That's right. So like based on some digging we did and some like Home Office reports, it's a pretty safe bet that a large proportion of those are targeted toward Muslims.
So what did you find when you looked at these data before and after he joined and compared it to other similar areas?
So what we found was that in counties that were trending very similarly to hate crimes in the pre-Salah period, we find that Merseyside experienced about a 16% drop in the hate crime rate.
They compared this to what happened to other types of crime too, such as theft and domestic violence. The only category where there was a drop was hate crime.
This wasn't the case of Merseyside residents becoming just happier overall and less likely to commit any kind of crime because Liverpool was doing well. It really was specific to hate crimes.
After looking at hate crimes, Salma and her colleagues turned to the second part of their study, hate speech.
Hate crimes is obviously an important outcome, but it's a pretty extreme outcome. Only real bigots, would commit a hate crime. Whereas hate speech or just anti-Muslim rhetoric is much more common. So we wanted to capture prejudice in that way.
Their approach was to analyse the Twitter accounts of 10,000 randomly selected fans who followed England's top 5 football clubs at the time. That was Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester City, Manchester United, plus Everton, which is also based in Liverpool. They ended up with a data set of about 15 million tweets, and then they categorised them as either mentioning Muslims or not.
About 7% of all those tweets were relevant to rhetoric about Muslims or Islam. From those 7%, we then want to know what is the percent that are positive or negative or neutral. So we got some research assistants to hand code a sample of those tweets. And then we trained an AI tool to classify all the rest of those thousands of tweets as being pro or anti or neutral toward Islam or Muslims. And what we find is that compared to what we would have expected among Liverpool fans based on the rates of anti-Muslim tweeting among fans of Arsenal, Chelsea, Man City, Man United, and Everton, there's actually a halving. So a 48% drop in the portion of anti-Muslim tweets among Liverpool fans.
At this point, Salma was pretty confident that they had found a Salah effect, that exposure to Mo Salah was reducing Islamophobia in Liverpool. But they wanted to know why this was happening. So in the third and final part of the study, they targeted a survey at Liverpool fans on Facebook.
And the ad said, help researchers understand Liverpool fans, which is the truth. Take our 2-minute survey. And so a lot of people clicked it. And it's really amazing. When people are passionate about a topic, they really want to share their views. And so we had over 10,000 completed responses to this survey, which is just incredible.
Everyone who clicked on the survey was shown a small bit of text reminding them of a few basic facts about Mo Salah. Half of them were then shown an additional text emphasising his religiosity, so that he's a practising Muslim, and the other half weren't.
And what we find is that priming people to think about his Muslimness made them more likely to say that Islam is compatible with British values, about 5 percentage points more likely, and also slightly more likely to say that they share a lot in common with British Muslims. Compared to the control group that didn't get that text. So for us, this is really telling us what the micro foundations, like the psychological foundations of this effect. It's that when you're exposed to one person from a minority group, when their minority identity is really salient, when it's clear in your head that that person belongs to the minority group, it's much easier to generalize your positive feelings about one person to the entire group.
So yes, they had found what they called a Mo Salah effect. But remember, this study was done during a period when Liverpool was doing really well. Salah was their star player and he was getting a lot of good media attention at the time too. Salma says he's also a very apolitical person and it's possible that this could have influenced how fans perceived him.
And this is kind of unusual. You see a lot of players stand up for social justice issues, for Black Lives Matter. They're really outspoken. And so potentially there's a trade-off between your goals as an activist and your goals in just getting the largest group of people out there to like you. And so just by definition, taking a polarizing stance might not lead to these general prejudice reduction effects. So we don't really know, but we think it probably helped that he was apolitical.
Salma also started thinking about how long-lasting the Salah effect really was, and how resilient.
The most important one for us is really what happens when the player stops performing well, or when they have a bad day, or the team is not doing well. How fickle are fans when it comes to this prejudice reduction?
To test this, she's begun work on a follow-up study that's using data from a fantasy football app for the Premier League.
People choose players each week and they select them based on who they think is going to perform the best, and the better players are more expensive to buy on the app.
Ahead of each match, the fantasy app predicts how many points a player is expected to score. The researchers take that prediction and benchmark it against how the player actually performs on the day.
So if you're predicted to score 15 points and you actually score 5 points, so you had a bad day, what is the fan reaction to that? So we look at social media posts, so Reddit, Twitter. We scrape, again, randomly selected timelines of these football fans, and we see whether they're more likely to speak negatively about the player if they are a minority, as opposed to a non-minority if they have a bad day. And we look at the opposite. So when you have a good day, when you overperform, do people reward minorities more for that, for example? And then finally, we actually look at the fantasy app itself. So we see among users whose sole purpose, their sole goal is really to maximize points on this app, is there some bias creeping in where people are more likely to bench or to sell a minority player? They sell them faster if they have a bad day as opposed to players from ethnic or national majority groups.
Salma and her colleagues published the results of this research in 2024. And they actually found no evidence of ethnic or xenophobic discrimination from journalists and fans towards Premier League players, either as a general trend or in response to those players having a poor performance or their teams losing a game. And this means that players from minority ethnic groups don't need to uphold a model minority myth to be accepted. Alongside this kind of work looking at celebrity footballers like Salah, Salma has also done research on what happens when different religious groups come into face-to-face contact during grassroots football leagues. She's looking at whether this kind of contact could help increase integration.
I've been testing this in pretty extreme settings, so post-ISIS Iraq among Christians and Muslims who have been displaced by ISIS, where there's very recent violence, the security situation is very precarious.
In the Iraqi city of Mosul, Salma studied what happened when a few Muslim players were placed in an otherwise majority Christian football team.
I also looked at this in Lebanon with Syrian refugee children and very marginalized Lebanese children. So these are extremely vulnerable groups who are, these leagues that I had set up were working against the backdrop of this continuing political and economic crises in Lebanon and pretty extreme stigmatization of Syrians.
In both post-ISIS Iraq and Lebanon, Salma found that playing on the same football team did help reduce levels of prejudice between religious groups.
So in both of those settings, I do see these positive effects of contact, but they're limited to the people you've come into contact with. They don't necessarily extend to everyone from that group. And I think the reason is that the backdrop of this is a precarious security situation, like these economic crises. It doesn't necessarily make sense for people to now start trusting strangers from the outgroup based on their experiences with a handful of individuals who they've personally gotten to know and gotten to trust and kind of vetted. So although face-to-face contact should be stronger in its effects on social cohesion, my particular body of work finds that it's a little less strong than the Salah effect. But I think that this is really driven by the fact that I'm working in these extreme settings when it comes to political and economic tensions, and the structural roots of intergroup conflict are much deeper than what you would find with Muslims in the UK, for example, where the stakes are just a bit lower and it's a little bit easier to nudge people to be a little bit nicer toward Muslims. There's no existential threat around making that leap in trust.
Thank you so much for your time, Salma. It's been really fascinating talking with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gemma.
That's it for this episode of The Conversation Weekly. This episode was first aired in December 2022. It was written and produced by me, Gemma Ware, with help from Mend Marawani and Katie Flood. Sound design is by Eloise Stevens, and our theme music is by Nita Soul. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please email us at podcast@theconversation.com. You can also sign up for our free daily newsletter by clicking on the link in our show notes. If you'd like to support The Conversation and what we do here on the podcast, please consider donating by going to donate.theconversation.com. That's donate.theconversation.com. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll be back next week.